China doesn't really think geopolitically. It's not really concerned with who's the boss. China just wants to be left alone. But China's not really interested in competing with the United States for global dominance. I live and work in Beijing, and no one talks about Taiwan. I think a conflict arising in the South China Sea between China and Taiwan is very unlikely.
The biggest red flag isn't what Professor Jiang does say, but what he stays silent about. He will spend 20 minutes long dissecting US debt or Western moral decay, but he won't spend 20 seconds on China's massive poverty crisis or its demographic decline. Instead, he pins China as this gentle giant.
China just wants to be left alone. China needs to maintain its own sovereignty.
A word that the CCP relies heavily on like a shield to tell the world, leave us alone while we do whatever we want. And he also completely ignores the fact that they're building the world's biggest navy and aggressively bullying their neighbors in the South China Sea.
China doesn't have a blue water navy.
He claims no one talks about Taiwan in China, when Taiwan is everywhere on Chinese social media. It is a subject that's in every military drill and every policy speech. To say that it's not a central topic is just a flat-out lie.
I live and work in Beijing, and no one talks about Taiwan. And if you go to Taiwan, no one talks about China.
He's there to make sure that you're so obsessed with the inevitable fall of the West, as he puts it, that you do not notice the system, which now he's a part of, is crumbling. For many of his fans, he is this viral YouTuber. He is the man who successfully predicted the return of Donald Trump, and he believes the inevitable decline of the West. He is this geopolitical genius that can somehow know the future. But before he was explaining psychohistory in a cozy Beijing studio, he had a very different career. One that ended with him being detained, beaten, and eventually deported by the very government that now he defends. How does a man go from being an enemy of the state to one of Beijing's most successful global influencers? Today we're looking at the journey of Jiang Xueqin, a story that perfectly embodies how the Chinese Communist Party tamed its most dangerous critics. Because if you want to understand what he's saying now, you have to understand how he got here. Jiang was born in 1976, the year when the Cultural Revolution just ended. It is the darkest period of modern Chinese history. This was a time of pure chaos, where families turned on each other and millions were massacred under the leadership of the dictator Mao Zedong. Everybody was desperate for an out. Jiang and his family made it to Toronto in 1982. According to Jiang, he grew up in a very humble, working-class immigrant household. His father was a cook, and his mom was a seamstress. He fought his way into Yale, one of the top universities in the world. But according to Jiang, the Ivy League life was both liberating and alienating. He was surrounded, according to him, by elite wealth that he couldn't touch. He didn't know it then, but his Yale education became a major asset for his career in China later on. But before we talk about his 20-year-long career in China, let's fast forward to 2002, when Jiang was a young filmmaker working for PBS. He was in his 20s. He was this upcoming freelance journalist, and he goes back to China to film some labor dispute in Taming. And that didn't really go well for him. According to public record, he was thrown in a cell for 48 hours. He was beaten, detained, and was forced to write a confession letter stating that he was basically a spy. So he was deported by the Chinese Communist Party in 2002. He became this hero for free speech. He was featured and talked about by fellow journalists. So it's fair to say he knows exactly what the Chinese Communist Party is capable of. Here's where things get really interesting. If you're caught filming dirty laundry for Western media, you are usually blacklisted for life by the Chinese Communist Party. There is usually no way back. But just 1 year later, in 2003, Jiang was miraculously allowed back in. As a China watcher, this is the part that I truly do not understand. And I think out of everything that I'm going to talk about in this video, this is the part that makes me most curious. He was allowed to go back because he quit journalism and joined the state education system. The year he went back to China is an interesting time. For many historians and journalists, 2003 represents the peak of what is often called the golden age of Chinese civil society. Compared to today, 2003 was significantly more open. Now, don't get me wrong, there were still human rights violations, and that's why he was detained and beaten in the first place. But China did have a very specific experimental kind of openness. The leadership of the Chinese Communist Party branded themselves as a populist compared to the more elitist Jiang Zemin, who was the former party leader. China, at least to the outside world, was trying to present itself as a country that is trying to be more democratic, trying to be more open. Now, it might not be true. I know it's not true, but that's the kind of image or brand that they're going for. After being allowed back into China, Jiang shifted into education, like he promised. He became involved in elite high schools, including roles at Shenzhen Middle School and Beijing University High School. His degree from Yale University in an Asian country like China really gave him a lot more credibility than his peers, which is why he was able to secure a lot of really high up roles. At one point, he was the deputy principal of the Shenzhen Middle School that he was working at, and he was also the director of the international division at Beijing University High School. So the next 20 years of his professional life was pretty high profile.
The Chinese school system, it's very effective at indoctrinating Chinese students in a certain way that does not permit them to engage different cultures. So it's a really unfair, elitist system.
And this is where the story gets even more interesting, because this version of Jiang from this period, talking about empathy, creativity, and education, being this reformer, looks very different from the figure that we see today. His way of reforming the Chinese education system was met with a lot of criticism as well. According to an article published by Sixth Tone in 2022, his students said that his leadership style is very despotic, very interesting choice of word. The article notes that Jiang unilaterally disbanded the student body because he felt that they were an obstacle to his vision. Students also reported that they felt as if they were lab rats, just, part of his grand experiment. Another thing that's really interesting, according to numerous reports, is that he secured massive privileges for his specific elite unit. And this inevitably antagonized the rest of the school and parents who were paying the same tuition. So after 20 years of, failing to reform the Chinese education system due to a lack of continued motive from the system itself and his personality issues, Jiang made a transition from a full-time education reformer to a viral geopolitical commentator. And this happened primarily 2 years ago in 2024. In 2024, Professor Jiang launched his YouTube channel called Predictive History Inside China. That should have been the first red flag for most people, because obviously you cannot stay in the capital of China and criticize the authoritarian regime at the same time. He claims that he used game theory and historical cycles to predict the future. To actual scholars, his theory is folklore science at best, but to his followers, he is basically a genius. One thing that I really wanted to highlight is a lot of people think that he's a genius mainly because he successfully predicted a comeback of Donald Trump. If you read the polls and if you follow American political analysis, it really wasn't a surprise. He was far from the only person who predicted that. Something that's even more suspicious, for me, is I started to see all these smaller channels started to repurpose his lectures online to sort of rush the algorithm as if it was a coordinated effort behind his popularity. This is truly the ultimate soft power play. The Chinese Communist Party's propaganda strategy has evolved. They no longer emphasize on harming people, simply just talk up China all the time. They're looking for the well-spoken, English-speaking influencers with Ivy League degrees who can play the role of the neutral academic, because you project more credibility when you appear to be objective. And Professor Jiang gives the CCP exactly that. He is a gatekeeper. And I think his journey of becoming a tool for China's soft power play globally is a perfect example of how the Chinese Communist Party has been successfully taming and turning its global critics. I will make more videos to debunk some of his other lectures, so make sure that you subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.